Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of Inside the Trojans Huddle from WeAreSC.com. We have the usual crew of USC fans and writers and fanatics and whatever else you want to call us. Greg used to say historians, but I'm not sure any of us but Greg qualify. Um, all right, so
True.
let's jump right in. I think probably the biggest news this past week was Chad Bowden, the new general manager of USC, having a pretty lengthy interview with the media. And I want to start there and see what we learned and what we still don't know. Um, so, Eric McKinney, why don't you start us off? And let me start by asking you this: Is Chad Bowden a rock star? He seems to be a rock star.
So you don't want to get carried away when guys sort of win the press conference and this early stuff, right? I mean, how many times have we gone down those paths of that guy said everything I wanted to hear early on, all in, he's got it, whatever. Now, don't get me wrong, he checked all those boxes, and he did at the first kind of introductory thing where we met the new assistants and Chad there. Uh, but on this one, it's the same sort of thing, and I think that him hitting all the same points and for sure has kind of the talking points and what he wants out there and all of that stuff. There's a lot of he's very polished, I think, what it comes off on that. He understands what he's trying to project. He understands where he wants USC to go. He understands I would like this to be talked about more. I would like this to be pushed, right? And so he knows all of that, and he's going to be good at generating positive momentum for USC when it comes to what gets covered and all of that. Now, I think from what I can tell so far, the substance behind it is absolutely there too. I mean, we talked about Lincoln Riley. When's Lincoln Riley going to get it or next step or whatever? And it was, what does the coaching staff look like that he can surround himself with? He's started to do that last year with that defense stuff. Chad Bowden has put together just an unbelievable group around him and how they handle stuff. And even in this first month, you hear so much more about the constant communication, who they're reaching out to, what kind of visits they're lining up, the junior day they brought together, like the tangible results so far, the commitments kind of early on here. Uh, there's there's a lot to like about the direction we've seen, House of Victory and collective stuff and NIL conversation with and surrounding USC just ramp up sort of exponentially again in this last little push of ducks are in a row. We know where we're going. This is the direction, and people are starting to fall in line and support it. When he talks about he's believable when he talks about we are going to recruit against the elite recruiting schools out there. We are going to go after every player, and you've seen it with the offers they've made and guys they're trying to bring in on visits. And talking about NIL being saying we might be the most aggressive out there. One of the most aggressive, maybe the most aggressive. That's one of those we'll see, right? When it comes time to it, if there's a guy that you really, really want, can you beat Oregon? Can you beat Ohio State? Can you beat some of those schools? I don't know if we've come to those crossroads yet, but he does not strike me as a guy that's going to say that and then settle for a three-star guy out of Delaware or whatever when clearly the number one target was a five-star local kid or from Texas or wherever. So again, at this point early on, yeah, direction seems great and he seems fired up and locked in. I know other guys want to jump in. I don't want to take it all, but what also struck out to me the way he talks about Jen Cohen and what a sort of lock she has on the athletic department and the way it's moving and the way she operates. That was another standout thing when he kind of goes into that, right? When those are unprompted comments, when he talks about those kind of people, I think that stands out as well.
Yeah, it's hard to give more praise to an athletic director than Chad Bowden gave to Jen Cohen. Now, look, coaches and administrators, they always have to talk nice about the athletic director. But it sure seemed to me that he was going well beyond the sort of appropriate nice talk. And I mean, he was, what do you call her, a beast, a monster? I can't remember what he said, but
Animal, animal, animal.
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 That's right.
Four times used it. And that just and that's a little bit what we've heard about her and what she said about herself. Super competitive. The language that she'll sometimes use, just aggressive and again competitive, and someone who is knows what she wants and is going to go get it.
It sounds like Eric just read the article I literally just published about 10 minutes before we came online to do the
He,
show.
he stole from you again?
He said he didn't want to cover everything, but he basically just took everything I was going to say. That was the impression I got from Chad Bowden's quotes, was the language he used, the expectation level that he's setting right now for everybody. And he has to walk that line, a little finely. It's going to be a tightrope because when you set a certain expectation level, you better meet it. I mean, when you're selling something, if you underperform, guess what? It's you're probably better off not trying to even make the sell. So some of the language that he used that really caught my attention, and Eric touched on some of it. When it comes to high school recruiting, I love how he preps it. We're going to take the most. I mean, that's in your face type of stuff. Um, when he was talking about, USC's potential in the NIL realm, we're going to untap every resource that this place has. I mean, to me, that's drill, baby, drill. Just keep going, become the richest you can be. Regarding, USC's NIL collective, he literally threw down the gauntlet with what he said. We're as aggressive as anyone. We might even be the most aggressive. I mean, that type of language. And then when like you said, he was more than praising Jen Cohen, it seemed like. It's literally telling everybody, come take it from us. We're attempting a coup takeover right now of college football, and everything we're doing, to what Eric's main point was, we're going to be uber aggressive about it in every single capacity. So from that standpoint, you love hearing it in March, but right now it's a great talk. You better walk that walk because come fall, if that expectation isn't met, you don't have that recruiting class. NIL isn't performing like you said it was supposed to. There's going to be issues.
He certainly didn't talk like a guy who didn't have a big enough checkbook. I mean, look, USC was well behind some of the other powers in NIL in the first few years of Riley's tenure. We all know that, and it had a substantial impact on recruiting. USC is talking about NIL very differently right now than they did in years past, and we'll see. The proof is in the pudding. But Chad Bowden was talking like a guy who has I'm not going to say a Phil Knight type checkbook, but when you say we may be the most aggressive, you're telling people, I think, that we're out making very, very big offers that are competitive with the biggest NIL spenders out there. That's what he seems to be suggesting. That is a significant change for USC. And I know USC fans because I see it on the message boards. USC fans have gotten to the point where they just assume that, oh, if we're talking to a five-star, Oregon or Ohio State will come in and give them a check and steal them away. Chad Bowden's not talking like that's going to happen anymore. And it might for individual players, but that's one of the things that really caught me is the confidence when it came to USC's ability to fund an elite roster. That was interesting. Greg, you have any impressions? What did you think was important from what we heard from Bowden?
Well, I think he acted like a real general manager. It was my impression that Jen Cohen has made it obvious that he has a big stick in the football program. We expect the NIL and the financial end of it, but I think as Mark pointed out, when he says we're going to go after high school players big time, and we'll fill it in on occasion with portals. That's music to my ears, honestly. Um, I think this general manager thing is really intriguing to me because I want to see whether the GM and the head football coach can really be on the same page. Because now, granted that Lincoln Riley has always said from the beginning he would like to get Southern California kids and California kids in general, but he really hasn't done that the way I think most of us know what that means. Um, so the question is this is going to go back now to it. We need to sign the players. That's what it gets down to. But my feeling is the believability of Bowden and the people that he's brought on are more believable than I have felt in a long, long time. And he's not afraid to say it. And that tells me that he knows what he's saying, that Jen Cohen is going to back him up 100%. Okay. He does. He says he gets along with Lincoln Riley, and I suppose he does get along with Lincoln Riley. But when things really start getting hot and heavy, and we get close to guys maybe making commitments and then following through and signing it, you wonder just where the GM manager spot goes. It's not going to be the coaching of the football team. I'm sure we can all agree on that. But he's going to have a lot of input, maybe stronger than we thought he was going to have. And from what I read and what I've heard, seen the videos of him, he's very believable. And it's not like he's coming from, some small school, Division One. He's coming from Notre Dame. Notre Dame doesn't try to hire bad people. I think the only bad hire I ever remember is when they took the high school coach from Cincinnati Moeller decades, generations ago. And so that he came out here, I think the thing to remember is he's got Los Angeles roots at some extent here. So he knows the territory. He's seen what's going on. And all in all, I can't wait to see what they're going to do in terms of what he says and what he does. I got a feeling it's going to be more what he does is going to be on the positive side.
Yeah, he had some interesting things to say about California high school football, and maybe an explanation as to why USC is more focused on California kids this year than in years past. Eric, you want to weigh in on that? His talk about this year's class was eye-opening to me.
Best California class in 2 decades, he said.
Yeah,
And
I
that's
mean,
where he's talking about, you look at those top 30, top 40 kids, the kids USC is going to recruit in the state. And yeah, he said that crop is the best it's been in 2 decades. And honestly, the 27 class is phenomenal as well. And so they've got kind of back-to-back chances to stack it. The other recruiting piece that goes into that he talked about is that they are planning to take the biggest high school class that USC has ever taken. Now, I don't know if he's taken into account, right? Lane Kiffin took that 31 person class to try to stay ahead of sanctions. There were a good half dozen, if not more, in there that were just, yeah, get in, get in, get in. But that's what it feels like. It feels like blowing. I mean, there's 24 in this class, gonna blow past that number, probably blow past 30. And Bowden's talked about he really feels like you build your culture through high school recruiting. And it's been tough. Lincoln Riley, when he got to USC, he talked a lot about culture building and how it had to change from when he took over at USC, what the program felt like, what the roster looked like, how do you build culture? And this is where he, I think, got himself into trouble a little bit with where they've been the last year, end of last 2 years ago, was trying to do two things at once. Trying to put a competitive team on the field right now every single year and also somehow build through high school and never be able to fully commit one way or the other. And so when you're bringing in a bunch of transfers and trying to build culture through that, they're around for a year or not. Yeah, I mean, 6 months. Some of them, when they get there and they're in and out. High school players keep getting jumped by the portal guys, so they don't stick around for 4 or 5 years, and that was a tough thing to do. So this feels like you've got the 23 class, you've got the 24 class. There's playmakers in that enough to kind of float them up the roster and then really hammer with this 26 class, this is your sort of foundational building class of young players that you can get in and again build culture through because you can start pushing it on them now, right? As high school seniors, they get it, they start to get involved, and then they come in and go through. So that caught my eye too. Just kind of out and out saying like coaches don't talk about their recruiting plans. They don't say anything about what we're going to do because coaches are terrified that well somebody else knows what we're going to do, they're going to somehow use it against us. But nope, we're taking the biggest high school class that USC's ever taken. And so to put that out there and again to say those things, you gotta back him up. And so I think he said that knowing that's what they're gonna do and that's what they're gonna put their full effort into in this class. And again, based on the early commitments, which USC I think tied for second most, somewhere up there top 5 in terms of just overall number at this point in the 26 class. The number of official visits that they've got guys coming in, the number of targets that keep sort of popping up and that they're checking in with, yeah, they are set to load up in this class. And now it's going to be important. It's got to be the right guys, right? You can't bring in a class of 35 and 16 of them are out the door after a year and a half. And I think that's where the added personnel guys, you get more vetting, you get more touch points, you get more overall buy-in from the guys who are coming to USC there. And that's the hope is that you get them to stick, you get them for the long run.
I'd like to just underscore something you said, Eric. Jen Cohen has made it very clear that she's in charge of the athletic department. She's made it very clear that she understands football. She's got a son that plays football, college football. She knows, she's passionate. Her personality probably is not like Lincoln Riley's, okay? And that's not a bad thing, but remember that anything that Bowden says, she's backed him up. He knows what he can say, and he knows he'll get back, he'll get backed by her. And Lincoln Riley is going to watch these interviews as a good coach would do and say, that's true, that's not true, he's fudging it or whatever. Lincoln Riley's going to get the impression that this guy's got a lot of power and probably a lot more power if they have a great recruiting class that they can sign. And if Riley can actually make them competitive to the point where they just don't, I'm not into like, we only lost 5 games by a total of 10 points. I'm sorry. A loss is a loss. And it's how you lose them. And some of them, quite frankly, were self-inflicted. And in the end, Chad Bowden could be the person that everyone across America is going to be looking at, especially if SC gets good. And that only is going to be evidenced by what Lincoln Riley does with his end of the job. And can he do it? Can he do it?
Yeah, look, there's no reason why Riley and Bowden have to clash. I mean, Bowden is going to be a powerful guy in this relationship, but the job has gotten a lot bigger. Riley's job has gotten bigger. The overall running of a football program, which is now more professional than it's ever been, has gotten a lot bigger. The best thing that Chad Bowden could do for Lincoln Riley is deliver great football players. Because I'm pretty confident that Lincoln Riley and the staff he put together going to win a lot of football games if they have really good players on the field. Like that's the most important thing. It's always been the most important thing. And so USC is sort of aligned well at just the right time with 2 really good California classes coming up. You now have an elite coaching staff. You have, it appears, an elite NIL program in place. And you have a lot of kids in your neighborhood who are always easiest to recruit and hold on to. So, I mean, it may be that Riley and Bowden clash on some things. That wouldn't be unusual. But I don't know that there's any reason to believe they will, so long as Chad Bowden is doing a good job delivering talent to Lincoln Riley, because that's what Lincoln Riley most wants. He wants to win football games. And you don't win football games with the 7th best roster in the Big Ten. And that may be what USC had this past year. you need to have much better football players in this program, and everybody knows that, all the way up from Jen Cohen down through the newest assistant coach on the staff. Um, so let's talk about. I don't know that we have any recent news on recruiting, but we are sort of seeing these lists put together of various weekends, a lot of them in June, which is when USC usually does its huge recruiting weekends. And they appear to have a gigantic number of big-time prospects coming in this summer. Mark, what stands out to you about this group of visitors that USC is about to have in a few months?
I want to go back to what we talked about on last week's episode, that recruiting, it's not a weekend, but the recruiting 2-day period of the June 17th through the 19th, that was a 4-member class. And I said, those are the guys, I kind of pointed out that those are the guys that USC wants to make sure stays at home and comes to USC. The local kids, the Mark Bowman from Mater Dei, the Tom from Mater Dei, the other two are escaping me right now, but they just added one more. And he's originally from Southern California. It's Kobe Pepe's younger brother who plays defensive tackle. So again, come back to California. You are the guys that we cannot have putting us in their final 2 and going to Notre Dame when everything's all said and done. So it's, to me, I'm watching that 2-day period. Who gets added to that, and I'm using finger quotes, that exclusive elite weekend, so to speak? Because again, right now, it started with 4 players. And now it's up to 5. I think that is going to be, you're going to get the red carpet treatment. But we're not here to talk to you about anything other than why you are the most important person in this class and the legacy that you can leave going forward if you come back to USC. That is going to be for California kids only. And I think that goes back to what we were talking about just a moment ago in the A block there.
The thing I'd like to add, Mark, is the kids have to want to make SC great again. They have to want to do it. They have to sit there and take the lead and say, I want to go because I love USC and I want to see them good. And if they can get a number of players that have that same feeling and that can dismiss kind of the first last 2 years, in other words, can they be persuaded, which I think they can be, to stay in Southern California? We all know that recruiting is a game of momentum. And if you start getting Southern California kids and they all see that their other guys, 4-star, 5-star are coming to USC, then you really start making headway. So
Yeah.
The key to me is they have to be able to get these stars, which they're going to do because they've had them before. I mean, how many guys do we know that SC went after that were 5 stars and then they're no longer in the program, or they end up going to Ohio State or Notre Dame? Once they stop that type of bleed and these kids start going to USC, it'll send a message not only to this recruiting class, but to the one following it. And then things get really interesting with Lincoln Riley, in my opinion.
Well, you're already starting to hear that from the recruits who are committed, like Samote. He's talking about, not just Lincoln Riley, but, assistant coaches like Coach Dog, Aaron Ama. And the other 2 players I was talking about was Talanoa Ely and Brandon Arrington.
Okay, just for a point of information, Mark, because I know that you know who they are, I know who they are. Tell our listeners, viewers, just who they are position-wise.
The coach I just mentioned, Coach Dog, he is one of those mover and shakers in the Polynesian community in California. He's the guy who, behind the scenes, besides just Chad Bowden, I hate to use the term repairing relationships, but making sure that these families, these kids, these young men know that you're not supposed to be playing anywhere else other than USC. And they're leaning into those resources that they have. So, Aaron Ama, he's one of those guys who can walk into any Polynesian household and say, yo, you grew up loving USC. Why aren't you here?
Bowden mentioned him twice.
Sorry?
Bowden mentioned him twice by name during the talk, right? As a elite recruiter that USC has.
Don't be surprised if USC doesn't make him an official assistant coach, because someone's going to scoop him up. I mean, he's that good. He has told me privately, I'm getting everybody. He does not like to lose one single player. He's got that type of attitude.
Well, certainly this is a class that has some momentum now, and if the season goes well, you could be looking at a top 3 class, I suspect, including the possibility of having really a defensive back class for the ages. I mean, this is a great year for DBs in California, and USC has commitments from some stars in that group, and I think is close in some others. So Doug Belk is another guy who has been putting in the work, and I think if things go as anticipated, USC is going to have the sort of defensive back class that doesn't come along all that often, which is pretty exciting. There's also an interesting quarterback situation. We talked about the Oregon flip a week or so ago, but USC obviously has Ryder Lyons out there who is going to take a mission. So he's a 2026 kid that's probably going to come as a 2027 kid. But USC is trying to do something that is pretty unusual, to land elite quarterbacks in 3 straight recruiting classes, which isn't all that easy. What do we think? Yeah, let's get your gut reactions on Ryder Lyons. Is this a guy who's now looking at a pretty crowded quarterback room and maybe interested in going somewhere where the path is easier, or is he just enjoying the process and enjoying the visits? Because honestly, if you were Ryder Lyons, it'd be hard to pass up recruiting trips where everybody's going to, give you cash and prizes and tell you how handsome you are. So what do you think? What's happening with Ryder Lyons right now?
Well, I think Ryder Lyons initially was all USC because they figured, okay, he's got family down in here. But in things that I've gathered and heard, he's more open to other schools. Remember, he's supposed to be going on a Mormon mission, which is fine. So you have to sit there and say, well, he's going to come back, like a number of USC players have done over the years. And whether he can keep that excitement level going is important. He's from Northern California, right? And I think that I would like him to come to SC, but my senses are not on a guy who's going to be here in 3 years. I'm more concerned about what we have this year and, who could come in next year. We all know in this day and age that to have 3 really good quarterbacks in your program isn't going to last very long because these guys all want to play. They all want to get to the NFL, and they're not going to sit there and sit. And Ryder Lyons is not going to sit there and say, okay, I'll wait my turn. Now, some will wait their turn. Some will. But when SC has to get to a point where you get the confidence that it's so big to be the quarterback at USC, I'm willing to wait an extra year.
These guys, though, they all assume they're going to be the guy, right? And so, my take is you bring in as many of these elite quarterbacks as you can, and usually the one who leaves is the one who should leave. That's been that way forever, right? Carson Palmer, Jason Thomas came in the same recruiting class. The right guy left. Jason Thomas was a fine player, but it wasn't Carson Palmer. And so I suspect Ryder Lyons may very well look at it and say, what's the worst that can happen? I show up, I spend a year at USC. If I'm not beating those other guys out, I can jump somewhere else and get a big check from them when I do. That's not such a bad situation to be in now that it's so easy to transfer. But what do you think, Eric, Mark? Any thoughts on Ryder Lyons, where USC stands?
I watched the interview that I saw that's floating around out there on social media. I know it's hard to gauge a young man who he's still in high school, still got another year. He hasn't even played his senior year yet. It's hard to gauge where they're at, but you watch their body language and you listen to the words they're using, and he said he's fine with it. He knows that wherever you go, you're going to have to compete. And USC's quarterback room it's going to be deep. There's no doubt about it. You'll have an idea where Husson Longstreet is in 2 years, because that's the next time Ryder Lyons shows up on a football field once he completes high school is going to be in 2027. So you'll have a better idea there. Williams will be in the program for a year. So again, it's a young room with extremely talented quarterbacks. And to what Greg was saying, guys don't want to sit anymore. The transfer portal makes it too easy to go find a program where pretty much you walk in, you're going to start, especially if you've got the talent to do so. So it's going to be interesting to watch. Quarterback is that one position where you can carry two, but you probably have to have at least a year between your starter and the backup. When you've got three guys all within the same range, that makes it a little more challenging. I don't know. This one's hard to read right now. He didn't seem like he was overly enjoyed that USC has a 2026 quarterback commit, but he said it is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, if you haven't committed to a school, it's kind of hard to complain about that school taking another elite prospect, right? I mean,
I don't want to say I was getting Juju Williams vibes, but there was a little bit of it there, just a hint, a whiff.
well, I guess we'll find out in time, but it may be a long time. And these days, quarterback movement happens in the blink of an eye. I mean, Malachi Nelson is about to start his first year as a starter at USC, right? That was the idea, and now he's on school number 3. So,
What's that stat, Eric? 60% of quarterbacks?
Yeah, of elite ones, not just any.
Yeah.
and the truth is, it's hard to know who's going to be elite at the next level. There's so much about quarterback play that is about mental processing and making very good decisions on the fly, and you can't always know that. So we'll see. Sometimes these guys are big and they can throw the ball a long way, and they get out on the field and they just don't have it. That's not unusual. So get as many of those guys as you can. There's a good chance if you get enough of those guys with Lincoln Riley's track record as a quarterback, you're going to find somebody who can play. There was an article on ESPN.com. I think it came out today, maybe it was yesterday, talking about these new contracts that the major programs are signing. Now that you can under this class action lawsuit, the field case, under the settlement there that will probably be approved by the federal court, probably. Schools are now in the revenue sharing business, which means they're in the talent procurement through cash business officially, not like the SEC's always done it. And so there's an article on ESPN.com about these contracts and the line that the schools are walking. If you're interested in this sort of thing, go read the article. I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on it now, other than to say there's some really difficult legal questions that are going to be hashed out in the courts over the coming years. The schools don't want to make these guys employees, but they want to have a great deal of control over them. What sort of deals they can enter, what sort of things they can say. They obviously want to be able to lock them in long term at their program. So they want to have a tremendous amount of control while also saying, but you're not an employee, you're an independent contractor. And we're not paying you for your services, we're paying you for your NIL. It's going to take a pretty clever set of lawyers and a pretty docile group of judges to be able to walk that line. So if you're interested in the issues, go look at the article. Maybe we'll talk about it at some point in the future. I don't want to spend a ton of time on it now, other than to say one other thing. We talked about a level playing field, and hopefully the rules give us that. But just understand that when it comes to labor law, you have 50 different states involved. Rules are not the same everywhere. When it comes to non-compete provisions and what you can do to stop somebody from running off and joining an employer, the rules are not uniform everywhere. And so it's going to be very interesting. Again, unless there's national legislation, it's going to be very interesting to see just how this all shakes out. And one thing is probably going to be true. It's not going to be a completely level playing field. Not like college football recruiting never has been, right? If you were a fan of Oregon State, you probably didn't grow up thinking, well, this is a completely level playing field with us and Ohio State and USC. And it still won't be. But I think we're going to see legal challenges not only to that to that house settlement, but also to the contracts that these kids are signing when they try to get out of them later. And it's going to be a very busy time for litigators, which, let's be honest, that's the most important thing.
But that's what's so funny to me about the article, especially, and just that whole thing is, oh, we saw this is interesting. Oh, we saw this is interesting. This is really interesting. This is really interesting. And then you ask somebody like, "What's your thought on all those?" And they're like, none of them will hold up if you actually sort of take them into a court situation that these other things have been going into. None of them. You get as creative as you want, put whatever you want in there. A lawyer will find somewhere to take it that it will get struck down. I mean, that seems to be the takeaway is, again, there's a thing that exists in the professional level that works. And at this point, you have to get everyone in the college model to just agree to say, look, this isn't really real, but what if we just had this for us? And everyone's okay with that. And until you get literally every single person involved to sign off on that, it's going to be chaos. And you're going to have, hey, this is good for this week. Now all of a sudden, no, that doesn't work. This kid can get out of this contract. This kid can go play at that school. And you're going to get all these individual things that just rip it apart. So that's kind of where you're always getting to is let's create this new thing that will just bind us. And it would work if everybody decided, okay, I'm okay with that. And I just don't know. I just don't think you're going to get everybody to say, okay, I'm okay with that. And you're going to, that's permanent. That's permanent. It's not going to happen.
I think what's so funny is you're asking teenagers who are already really responsible in their everyday lives to be 1099 employees. I mean, just the idea that you're going to tell a high school recruit, you know what, you're an independent contractor, here's your salary, go do what we tell you to do. This thing is ripe. It stinks already.
Here's the good news. There is good news. And that is that at least these deals are going to be more out in the open. And while I don't know that we can completely trust the universities to show a lack of self-interest, I mean, we're here because of what they've been doing for the last 60 years. It's also the case that they're going to be more responsible actors with better legal representation than under the old system where the school's not supposed to be a part of it, and who knows who's running around offering money to these guys. So that's at least good. But these will not be the first employers who are trying to sign contracts to make it so that the person they're paying for work is not an employee but an independent contractor. This happens all the time. The courts are very good at sniffing that out because there's so many issues that go along with that, like who has to pay the employment taxes, like who's responsible for torts committed by that person within the course and scope of their job duties. So this is an issue that gets hashed out in the law all the time in all sorts of industries. So there's nothing unusual about this other than the fact that we've never necessarily seen this before, and we'll all be wondering whether or not the agreement that USC just signed with that 5-star defensive end is going to be enforceable or not if he decides he wants to leave. And we'll all just have to wait and see what happens. But it's not boring, right? It's not boring, guys. You don't want boring, do you? All right, let's do this. Let's talk about the strongest position group on the USC team heading into spring ball. And we may all have different opinions, so we'll do this every week. We'll go through strongest position group this week, second strongest next week, all the way till we get down to the position group that scares us all to death. And so because we may have different opinions, I'm going to let somebody make the decision today, and that's the group we're going to talk about. That person is going to be Mark Culkin. Mark, what is the strongest position group on this team heading into spring ball?
It's by far, without question, the defensive line. From end to end, in the middle, USC has a deep and, on paper, really good defensive line. I mean, imagine this. This is your starting front four. Anthony Lucas, Keyshawn Silver, Jamal Jarrett or Kobe Pepe, and I don't know, why don't we throw Cameron Fountain or Jakeem Stewart or Braylon Shelby, or what happened about Jade Abasari playing inside of the three? I mean, all of a sudden, what USC didn't have last year, USC's got to find playing time for guys this year. I dare anybody on this panel to disagree with me.
Who wants to disagree with him? I'm not, by the way. I think he's right. Greg,
So
Greg, you're disagreeable. Do you want to disagree with him?
I'd say running back. I think you got a ton of guys for as many carries and as many snaps as you need at running back. So defense, I'll listen to defensive line. I think it's top 2, top 3, absolutely. Jamal Jarrett has not played a lot. So again, just saying he's a guy that's going to deliver and be great. Hopefully. Absolutely. Hopefully. Kobe Pepe, again, hopefully, right? There's some guys in there where it's if they take a step forward, if they take a step forward. So I like what they have. I think the pieces there are great, right? What we saw from Anthony Lucas the first half of last season, great. You're not bringing back a guy that got you 8 sacks last year and oh my gosh, everyone's going into every game. How do we block this guy? We got to double that guy. We got to double this guy. What do we do? So I do think that spring will be interesting. How do they work together? Who's taking that next jump? The questions of, man, do we have enough? Are they going to be good? Are they what? Those, I totally agree. No. Figure it out. The guys are there. The guys are there for the first time in a long time. And it feels like you do have a mix. Some guys have played, some guys are scratching the surface a little bit. So I do agree. The defensive line is good and in the best position it's been for USC in some time. Yes. Yeah, until Thule could play all 4 positions by himself and whatever 75 sacks that his last year here.
You certainly. This is not the last year of Udeze, Cody, and Patterson because these guys aren't proven that way. It's not 1989 with Tim Ryan, Don Gibson, Dan Owens, and then Junior Seau on the outside. It's not that because you had a lot of proven guys. What it is, though, is it's a group where if you look at the 2 or 3 deep, they're positions where you look at the number 3 guy in the depth chart and say, wow, that guy could play in the NFL. And it's been a long time since USC had a depth chart up front where you could find guys that are second and third string and say, I think that guy will be an NFL player.
Especially in the middle.
Case, right? Yeah, that is the case right now. And there are a lot of big bodies on this front. Doesn't mean they're going to be superstars. I expected more from the edge rushers last year than we got. Okay, so we may have a similar situation this year. What I do know is that USC is going to be able to throw fresh 300-pound bodies at offensive lines all game, all season. That's nice, right? That's a nice thing. Greg, isn't that a nice thing? Being able to throw a bunch of fresh
Chris,
300-pounders?
whatever you say, we're all going to agree. Otherwise, you're going to take us to court. But
I won't sue you, Greg. There's no money in that for me.
Oh, yeah. Well, see, besides Chris wanting to get all the money he can, which is fine, I don't have the same enthusiasm that some of you have on this, and I understand why, and I understand why I'm more hesitant to all of a sudden claim all these guys are all good. First of all, for me, if I have to watch them in spring ball, so to speak, to see how they do against USC's offensive line, which is a whole big question altogether too, in my opinion. You can sit there and say, well, he should be good. And there's always that hope and enthusiasm, which I understand and is an important product. But until I see these guys actually play, and I don't mean specifically against, Clay Helton's team from Georgia or Southwest Missouri State or whoever it is they're playing. I want to know what happens when they play Notre Dame. I want to know what happens if they play Penn State or Michigan again. I want to see when they really go up against really strong teams that have physical players. I will hope that they would all come out and be good players. I am not going to sit there and say they're going to be a great or good defensive line. I hope they're going to be great. I hope, that they have some things, but I couldn't sit there and say, oh, they're going to be really good. They're going to be great. If you look at the players that has come in the last 3 years, it doesn't always work out the way you want them to work out. Uh, Perhaps the difference will be the linebackers, the defensive backs. Maybe they're going to be important too. But if you're going to start with a defensive line, which I would, uh, these guys have got to come through. And I'll make a judgment on how good they are when I watch them actually play. Even if somebody tells me, oh, I think they're really good. Now, there's a few people I would listen to, but by and large, I don't listen to anybody in terms of what they think. I may think exactly as they think, but I have to see it myself. And I think that goes back to me playing. I think it goes back to me coaching. I think it goes back to a lot of things. And I have to see a lot of things before I can make a judgment. But as far as hoping, I hope they're all as good as you guys are saying.
Well,
So,
let's
Greg,
say
what-
this.
I
Let's
was
say this,
gonna
Greg. I'm sorry, Mark. Go ahead.
ask Greg, what is the strongest position group if it's not the defensive line or the running backs? Because that
What
was
is the strongest? You know, that's an interesting question, actually, Mark. What we think is strong for this team won't be known until they play somebody else, a quality somebody else. Then we could say this team is this, that. Look, if our offensive line starts blocking these new guys that are in here and even the returners, then what are you going to say? The offensive line looks great, or the defensive line is not as good as we had hoped. There's a lot of things that when teams scrimmage against each other is very rare. Now, when SC has been really good, I mean, really good, like most of us want them to be, their practices were insane. Like Pete Carroll's practices were insane. And I know that bugs the living crap out of people to go, don't go back to Pete Carroll. First of all, you go back to Pete Carroll because you saw what it takes. And the players that they were able to bring in to back these players up showed. And you got to see what they were like against decent NFL type offensive lines. So I hope it all works out. But what do I think about the other positions? I don't know. I think I know what the athletes are. But just because you're a good athlete doesn't mean you're going to be a great player. The good news is the coaches, I think, are good, which is a real change for me. That they all look really good. The change will be is can those coaches get the players to develop to the point where the good ones can become great, the average ones become good, and that's going to be the thing because in the end, I don't think honestly everyone's going to know what's going on in the spring because so far there's been no announcement to my knowledge that we'll be able to watch the spring practices in their entirety, especially without a spring game, which really, Chris, it really comes down to how important was the spring game being canceled? Does it have a mark against the general public? Is it a good, smart thing to do with all these guys transferring after spring ball? What do you guys think about the spring ball? I haven't heard much.
The coaches don't need the spring ball, right? I mean, the coaches don't need the spring game. They can scrimmage without us present.
Exactly.
The spring game was for the fans, and Lincoln Riley doesn't much care about that. Most coaches don't at this point. So we probably won't have a sense. USC is not going to play anybody with a pulse until probably October. So yeah, there's a fair amount of speculation going on with every position group, including this one. I think what we can say, though, is there were years in the past where you look in the not too distant past, where you look at the depth chart and say, I have no idea how that group of guys is going to be able to hold up against Notre Dame or Penn State or Oregon, right? You just look at it and say, I don't even understand the theory. I don't understand how you can look at that group of athletes and say, these guys are going to be able to perform on Saturday. I think we can all agree that's not the case now. These guys may or may not live up to their potential. But what you have is you have a position group that you look at and say, there's some athletes, there's some athletes there, there's some size there, and there are a lot of bodies there of guys who you should be able to develop, right? You give me 10 guys that all have the physical skills to potentially be future NFL players, and a good defensive staff should find 6 of them who can play at a fairly decent level on Saturday. And I think that's what we'll see. I don't know if there's going to be these superstars from this group in 2025. I don't think anybody knows that because there's no established guys. You have guys like Cameron Fountain, who I think will probably take a big step up, right? You saw promise from him. I think Anthony Lucas, especially against the run, played really well and really physically before he got hurt. Obviously, Jakeem Stewart looks like the sort of guy who has more talent than God should give to any single defensive lineman. And what he does with that, we don't know. But at the very least, we're not looking at the depth chart saying, I don't understand how that group can hold up against a top 10 opponent. We're not saying that. We're saying we'll see whether these guys develop the way we want them to. But boy, that looks like a big group of big dudes that can move. And that's a nice place to be in because we haven't been there in a long freaking time. That's the reality.
A lot of first dudes off the top.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
And
we're talking about that group without needing a Lorenzo Cowan or a Carlon Jones to do anything. And like in years past, it would have been, boy, those 2 second-year guys better become starters and impact players immediately because there's nobody else. And so, can those guys make a jump? Sure. I mean, absolutely they can. But yeah, you're at a point now where you can actually lose track of a guy or two on the defensive line instead of like, if you're of a number, you better play. You better play and contribute a ton this year. And that, again, that goes back to kind of building that depth that just haven't seen across the board.
Yeah. Okay, that's it for this. Next week we'll have the second best position group, and I don't know who's going to get to pick it, but it won't be Mark because he already picked. Okay, pop quiz, guys. We're going to close with this. Nobody knows this is coming. You just got to be ready. You got to be nimble on your feet. Most underrated play in USC football history. Greg Katz, you're our historian. Give it to us.
Most underrated play
Most underrated play.
on either side of the ball.
Either side of the ball. You can go back as long as you want. You can go back to the Thundering Herd days with this one if you want. I don't care.
Well, that's a really difficult question because there's been so many great plays. But I tell you, every time I say what mine might be, I just get this avalanche of you're living in the past, you grow up or what have you.
We're just asked to live in the past, though. You have permission right now.
Thank you, Mark. I think that the play that I will always remember for me would be things like, Jimmy Jones throwing to Sam Dickerson in the end zone at the time of it all. I think that the one that always stands out to me, I'm sorry, it's just the way it is for me, is O.J. Simpson's 64-yard run against UCLA.
But that's not underrated. That's not underrated. Everybody knows that was spectacular. It lives in lore. That doesn't count.
Most underrated one?
Underrated.
I don't think it's underrated, but I would say maybe Manuel Wright, defensive tackle, sacking, was it Aaron Rodgers?
Aaron Rodgers, 2004.
Yeah, I think that was the one that was underrated because it had such an impact at that time of the game, late in the game, so much on the line. Rodgers was just absolutely a freak out there throwing the ball. So for me, if I have to pick one, and there's more than one, trust me, it's got to be Manuel Wright making that sack.
I like that one. I knew you'd come through, Greg. All right, who's got another most underrated play in USC football history? Greg is he's a leader in the clubhouse right now. That was a good answer.
So I don't know if this is pandering. I don't know if it's pandering to Chris.
Probably.
But the Rodney Pete chase down, right? On the interception again, and I don't want to go. I don't like when I talk about stuff Chris likes. I hate that. But it really doesn't. It's not 4th and 9, right? I mean, but it's huge. It's huge. It's huge in that game, in a rivalry game, in that USC UCLA history, and it's not the first thing that comes up when you talk about both 87 and 88, right? Those games. It doesn't get brought up as quickly as it should. Like that should kind of be I don't know, the chase down game.
I don't want look, Mark. I don't want to intimidate you, but that was exactly the play that I had in mind. I mean, let's put this in context.
What if I give you a different USC Notre Dame one?
You'll have a chance. You'll have a chance to top it maybe, but 10-0. USC's driving deep into UCLA territory. Bruins are I think they're ranked number 5 at the time. They had only had one loss. They were a pretty significant favorite in a game that's going to decide the Rose Bowl berth. Pete throws an out. It looks like a sure pick 6. Rodney Pete chases down a really good football player, makes the play, ends the half at 10-7. USC comes back and wins it, I think 17-13. If he doesn't make that play, Rodney Pete's career and that USC 87, 88, 89 time frame, I think is looked on very, very differently. That was an enormous play. Okay, good. I like that one. You just overtook Greg. Congratulations with your pandering. Mark, what do you got?
Chris, do you remember 2011? Remember that game? Remember the USC Notre Dame game? South Bend, Indiana, 2011. Looked like Notre Dame was going to go in and score, and Jawanza Starling picked it up, took it the other way. That might have been the difference in that game, because what was the final score? 31-17. I mean, touchdown going one way as opposed to going the other way. So that was one that popped into my head.
That's a great one. I was at all 3 of these games that we brought up, and I do remember that when USC came out really physical that game, pushing Notre Dame around, and the Irish sort of started to climb back, and it looked like, this one could turn. Because if you've been a USC fan long enough, you've seen too many games at South Bend where things start out well and then it starts to turn and gets ugly. That looked like one that could turn until he picked up that fumble and took it back. That was beautiful.
Yeah. And he's I think he's just one of those players who kind of gets lost in the shuffle among USC safeties. Not one of the elite, but pretty good in his time at USC. But for me, I've got a couple other personal favorites. And again, it's all about rivalry. My personal favorite is always going to be Antoine Simmons going 5-hole with that pick, that pick 6. You have Fat Pat
between the legs, pick 6.
Yeah.
Beautiful play. Yeah,
that was Pete Carroll's first year, and that was when you knew, all right, this team's got something special underneath all of that culture they're rebuilding. But you had Fat Pat, Mike Patterson with his scoop and score in that, what was it, 50-0 game. But yeah, though I think those are the 3 that just stand out as maybe the least, I don't want to say least appreciated, but underappreciated games, underappreciated plays.
I knew you guys would come through for me, even though I didn't tell you what the category would be. I knew in a pop quiz of great USC football plays, this group could come through. Okay, guys, anything we want to share with the audience before we hang up this week?
WeAreSC, $1 for your first week there. About to roll into spring ball stuff. We've got a bunch of breakdowns from what Chad Bowden said earlier this week, and then recruiting. Prospects on campus. Big weekends about to start heating up.
I mean, $1, really, guys. It's $1. So go sign up, pay your buck. If that's a problem, if you come and knock on my front door, I will give you the $1. You're gonna have to front it. But if you knock on my front door and say I want the $1, I'll give it to you. Okay, that's how much I care about this product. Okay, so come check us out. All right, anything else, guys? Is that it? I think that's it. I think we did our duty this week. Okay, we'll see you next week. Until then, everybody, fight on.
I know.